Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Sashnee Moodley. Researcher and analyst Professor Raymond Suttner joins me to discuss whether we are in a post-apartheid society. Hi, Professor.
Hi.
Why are you so preoccupied about whether or not we are in a post-apartheid society?
Yes, I've been writing often on this, and one of the things that has struck me always is that when you see people lying on the ground and the police having them there or having shot them, they're invariably black people. They're not white people. They're not even foreign whites who are there illegally or anything like that. They will be black people. They will be the same category of people who have been there in the apartheid era. There's a continuity, I think, in the institutional racism of certain state agencies and other institutions, in that the idea of who is a criminal is a black body. And you have a conception, the way police patrol, invariably those who will be what is called loitering will be black people, because they are the poor, they are the most unemployed, and consequently they tend to be targeted. And with institutional racism, if I say that we're not necessarily in a post-apartheid society, I'm not saying nothing has changed. I do think that society is fundamentally changed in many ways. But there are continuities from the apartheid period which are very troubling and which point to the continuation of practices, customs, attitudes, and so forth from that period. And it occurs also in the universities, because from before apartheid, if black people came into the universities, they would come under different conditions of white people, conditions that were disadvantageous to them. They would come with problems with accommodation. They would have loans that they would have to repay for years after finishing. They would, in many cases, not have the opportunity to enter on with the same advantages as a white student had. For example, I was teaching some courses a year or two back, and you would see sometimes an African student arrive late. And when, in the eyes of very many people, this is African time. But in reality, what it may have been is that this person had to take a number of taxis, and some of the taxis don't leave until the taxi is full. They don't leave at the time you need to get to the university at 8:30. Many of the white students had iPads. They had come from homes where they had electricity and computers and all of these things. And I think the conditions under which black students have to operate continue to be disadvantageous. And some of them can't get their results at the end of their degree because they owe money. And those results they need in order to get jobs later. And families are expecting them, after all the sacrifices that they have made to get them into university, they're expecting them to be able to support them, and universities withhold that. Equally, if you go and you want to you have a BA/LLB or something like that, and you want to become an advocate, you've got to be able to pay for, when you get pupillage, when you're trained by another advocate, you earn nothing during that period, or very little. You've got to be able to support yourself during that period. You also have to buy books as a lawyer. You need your own books, as well as whatever you get from the library of the people in the chambers, but you usually must have your own books. And white people tend to have social networks, what's called social capital, that you get briefed by people who know your family. If you're an advocate, or if you go and want to be an attorney, you can approach a firm who knows this person and that person. But in the case of black people, it's very, very hard to do this. And then you come out of with your degree, and you've got about 10, 15 years when you're going to have to pay back the loan that you've had. Now, that is the period when you are trying to establish yourself in your profession, whether a doctor, a lawyer, or whatever it happens to be. And it's the most difficult period when you're earning very little, and unlike the white people, you don't have these contacts. So what I'm arguing is that insofar as universities operate on this unequal basis, it's not to do with who is the vice chancellor. It doesn't matter who it is. Institutional racism means institutionally black and white operate on an unequal basis, and consequently the post-apartheid South Africa is on the one hand leaving apartheid behind, but it's on the other hand deep-seated continuities of inequality between black and white.
Do you think that students, universities and government will be able to find common ground to address these problems?
Well, to have proper engagement, to reach solutions, you have to engage properly with one another. And it doesn't seem to me that government has seriously engaged with the protesters. And in the case of the protesters, it's quite difficult to know how they should engage, because many of the fees must fall people say that the SLCs don't represent them. And the SLCs are the bodies with whom universities and government are interacting, so that the solution that you come up with will have instability due to the fact that the students who are doing the negotiation are not accepted as legitimate by everyone. So this is a problem of the way in which the fees must fall movement operated. Leaderless, organizationless, etc., etc. It's sort of pure democracy, but it's very hard to make decisions that way. I'm not criticizing them, I'm just saying it's a feature, and I think it's a number of healthy phenomena which we must engage with. Also, ideologies are diverse, so that it's not that they're pulling in one way only. Also, I think, although I'm criticizing government for not engaging properly and the universities for engaging only with the SLCs and not trying to find a way of engaging with all, which I think is difficult, I think we mustn't just, if we support the demands of the students and the need for equality, we mustn't simply endorse what they're doing. For example, Achille Mbembe says that when we say something must fall, what are we going to build in its place? There has to be clarity about that. And I don't think there's clarity about how decolonizing knowledge will occur. And my view is that the students themselves obviously don't have the expertise that the existing lecturers have. And unless they get some sort of panel to monitor the process of changing curricula, the same people who provided so-called colonial education will provide decolonial education. There is a need to move away from north-centered education, I think, not to abandon it, but to include more work from the south, and I think they have to work that out. There is what I would like to say finally, which is important, and Achille Mbembe has also referred to this. There is a certain tendency to resort to violence or to draw on violent rhetoric on the part of many of the students, as if violence is a solution or a preferred method. And I think this is based on a misreading of Frantz Fanon. But whether it came from Fanon or not, South Africa battled very hard to have peace and social justice. Unfortunately, the principle of non-violence has not been properly interred within the consciousness of South African people. ANC has never really propagated it as a government, as a movement. But I do think it's very important that we must understand that solutions historically have been achieved, so-called solutions, through force, and they don't endure. We've got to have reasonable discussion between people in order to resolve these issues and not romanticize violence. Violence is something that you can only embark on after very responsible discussions when all other options are closed. So I'm not happy about that part, but it's not all students who are doing this.
Thanks for speaking with us, Professor.
Thanks a lot.
That was Professor Raymond Suttner speaking to Creamer Media's Polity about whether we are in a post-apartheid society.